So we at LAA want to welcome Walt to speak today. And hopefully one day he'll join us at LAA. I think he lives in Williamsburg, so that's pretty close. And before citing his august career, I'll share 3 things about Walt. And this is, I sent him an email and he replied right away. I asked him a couple questions. The first one I was asking, he didn't reply to. I thought his name was Swedish because my wife, her family was from Sweden. She said, that's got to be a Swedish name. And mine, of course, is Norwegian. So it sounds like common Scandic roots. And I looked it up on the Google Translate. Engel means angel in both Swedish and Norwegian and Danish. So that kind of nails it down. And that's maybe why he's working off the Earth into space. And then I looked up his actual name and it says that in Swedish it means English. But I'll let him comment on that. First time I met Walt was when we attended the 39th Viking anniversary, which he hosted. He was up front and introduced everybody. And at the beginning, he said, all of those who worked on the Viking project, please stand. And I was very proud to be one that had contributed along with many others. The third thing is he responded to, and I also heard through Doug Morris, and about his bicycling. And he said, when not holed up at headquarters spending dollars and leading the space technology development, Walt and his wife liked to travel the world by bicycle, fueled by good beer and cheap food. And he added that they rode in Belgium, in Italy, in Canada, Scotland, the national parks in the US, and several thousand times around the Langley Air Force Base runway, which that's pretty hard to believe because that's a long way. I used to bike every day into Langley. Okay, now we get to his career. So since 2019, Walt was at headquarters, and he was a deputy AA. I got that. Associate administrator to programs, and those involve 10 programs in the Space Technology Mission Directorate. And that had a budget of about $1 billion a year. Before that, he was at Langley. He was the director of space technology and exploration, and directorate, right? And that involved human and robotic spacecraft. He was prior to that, I guess, chief engineer, and that involved a wide amount of R&D throughout the center. I know much of my work was funded through the chief scientist, and they have money that programs they start up. He's an AIAA fellow, and he received several NASA medals and a presidential award, and that's for the top civil service in the whole country. So I'm happy to present to LAA Walt Engström to speak on his work in the space technology and mission development programs. And particularly, he knows about the NASA Moon-to-Mars strategy, which is in a document he can refer to.
Thank you all for that introduction, especially the part about my last name. It's Danish, by the way, so you got it right. I hadn't ever heard an introduction quite like that one, but that's great. It's great to be back here at Langley. As you said, I spent 30 years here before I went up to headquarters and probably crossed paths with a lot of you at one point or another. See a lot of familiar names, faces in the audience. So it's great to be back. See a lot of familiar faces in the audience. A couple things about the lots of miles around the Langley Air Force Base. Like Olaf, I used to commute into work by bike. We lived over in Hampton, and then for probably 7 or 8 years, we had a group that used to meet out behind the fire station in the morning and do a couple of fast laps around the runway. And I wish I'd kept a log, but I would guess over 8 or 9 years, and probably from August to October, 4 or 5 days a week, we'd do that. So it's a lot of miles, a lot of loops around that runway. I could probably do it with my eyes closed at this point. Good to be back. So let's see. I did want to say I started my career late 80s, I was a graduate student, and then Del Freeman hired me into the vehicle analysis branch. Thank you, Del. That was a great place to start, and I spent about 15 years. I see a few other VABers here in the audience, so it's good to see everybody. He kind of read through. Worked in space technology and exploration, worked for Ralph Rowe in the NESC, and then Lisa Rowe is the chief engineer. That was an interesting transition from Ralph to Lisa. Steve Jerzik brought me up to headquarters, convinced me to come up there when he was just about the time he had left space technology and moved up to the AA position. So I thank Steve for that and think about him often. I think most everybody knows he passed back in November. But it was a great career. Langley feels truly like home to me. It's good to be back here and have a chance to talk to you. So with that, let me tell you what I've been doing up at headquarters for the last 5 years in Space Technology Mission Directorate. Let's see, there are a couple people who have had their fingerprints in STMD, including Bobby Braun, who you probably all know. I think he was here about a year ago, talked to you, and Mike Kazarek, former alum, Langley alum, and then Steve Jerzik, of course, and Michelle Monk, who you might know is a current STMDer, and Prasan Desai, who also started his career in VAB. He's the deputy AA. So we've got a lot of fingerprints from Langley in STMD. STMD was actually formed in 2011. Bobby Baran went up as the chief technologist, created the mission directorate, and then handed off to Mike Kazarek. And it really was a sort of a scrappy startup. For the first 4 or 5 years, they really had to fight to maintain their existence. And I think now that we're in, I think, year 13, we're pretty well set. We've got a budget of over $1 billion, $1.2 billion this year to invest in space technology. And we do that to basically advance space technology for the U.S. in the global economy. There are a lot of countries who are really interested in space now. It's about $1 trillion, approaching $1 trillion global economy. And STMD is really positioning NASA and the U.S. to continue to lead. We're trying to encourage economic growth in the space industry and space technology and an expanding space economy. A lot of commercial entities, you've probably heard know about a few of those, who are really commercializing space technology in the space industry. And then finally, inspiring the pipeline. We've got a pretty broad investment in educational outreach and early career capabilities. And I'll talk about some of those here in just a minute. Okay, we are organized by technology readiness level, TRL spectrum. Is everybody familiar with the TRL scale, low TRL, basic research, all the way up to TRL 9 operations? So we've got 4 major program lines. We've got an early stage portfolio that invests in kind of the TRL 1 to 3-ish. That includes things like early stage innovation, space technology research grants, which is the educational part of our program. We invest in centers through the Center Innovation Fund and early career initiatives. Those are things we ask the centers to basically technology development the centers do for us. We've got a prizes, challenges, and crowdsourcing program, NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts program, NIAC, that's been around for a long time. That's a really low TRL, 0 to 1 even, we call it. Probably the most competitive program we have in the entire mission directorate. We solicit opportunities for people to bring technology ideas through NIAC. The little Ingenuity-Mars helicopter had its roots in a NIAC program. So that's the kind of things that we invest in that actually make it into operational status. SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, we run that for the whole agency. That's about $250 million. We've got a tech maturation line. That's the mid TRL 3 to 6. In fact, the Game Changing Development Program, which is housed here at Langley, its program office is here at Langley, runs that for us. And the tech demonstration, that's kind of the big flight demonstration, the expensive demos that we have to invest in and prove in a space environment. And we've had a couple of those. I'll share a couple of those with you here in a few minutes. This is a busy chart, but I'm going to try and walk you through it. This really explains our what we call our strategic framework. If you look up on the top there, kind of the pastel ice cream colored lines, those are our strategic themes. And the shorthand for those are go, land, live, explore. And I'll tell you the translation. That go is the one in the red there on your left. Rapid, safe, efficient space transportation. That's basically our investment in propulsion technologies. So we're investing in nuclear propulsion, in electric propulsion, in cryogenic propulsion for deep space applications, for the moon and for Mars and beyond. And then in yellow there, expanded access to diverse surface destinations. We call that land. That's really our portfolio of entry, descent, and landing technologies, precision landing, getting to target places on the moon, coming back from the moon to Earth's atmosphere, basically the EDL portfolio. And then we've got something called sustainable living and working further from Earth. That's LIVE. That's basically allowing astronauts, humans, and robots to live long-term in space and potentially on the surface of the moon and maybe even Mars one day. And then we've got the transformative missions and discoveries. That's the Explore portfolio. And that's a little more of a catch-all, not a grab bag, but some more sort of out-of-the-box technologies that will enable new missions out into the solar system. So go, land, live, explore. That's our four thematic investment lines. If you look there on the surface of the moon in the picture, there are a couple of lines in blue that are really technologies sets that we're investing in to enable the lunar return, what we call the Lunar Surface Innovation Initiative. And those technologies are things that we're actually demonstrating on the moon and enabling humans and robots to live and endure. But if you look closely, there's a trace that goes from the moon, from the left over to Mars. And the idea is we're investing in those lunar technologies as a proving ground to basically the technologies that will one day enable us to fly humans to the surface of Mars. So that's our portfolio in a nutshell on one slide. I'll give you a couple of examples of some highlights that we've flown in the last year or two. A couple of them had roots here at Langley. And I'll just start up at the top left corner. We've got a small spacecraft technologies program, invest in CubeSats and small satellites. We do about 30 missions a year, which includes some suborbital testing we do on suborbital rockets, but also small spacecraft in lunar orbit, in low Earth orbit, but also in lunar orbit. We sent a little spacecraft called Capstone to the near rectilinear halo orbit, NRHO, which is the orbit around the moon that the Gateway is going to be launched into. So this little 12 unit CubeSat is now orbiting in the NRHO orbit at the moon. It has been for about a year, demonstrating communication and navigation at the surface, around the surface of the moon. To the right of that is solar electric propulsion. We're developing a 12 kilowatt electric thruster that's going to power the Gateway into that same NRHO orbit. And if we go a little further to the right, deep space optical comm. This is a laser communication system we launched back in December on the Psyche spacecraft. It's about 40 million miles from Earth right now, and is using laser light instead of radio waves to communicate back at about 1,000-fold bandwidth capability from typical radio waves. Lofted, you may be familiar with that one. That was a mission November 2022, developed here at Langley. Big inflatable heat shield, big success. 6-meter heat shield that re-entered the Earth's orbit from basically Mach 28 conditions. Let's see, down on the lower left, Draco is the partnership we just started with DARPA to develop and demonstrate a nuclear thermal rocket engine. That's pretty exciting. The fact that we're doing that with DARPA is a big deal. Cryogenic fluid management, cryofluid propulsion, storing cryofluids, transferring cryofluids is probably an enabling technology for lunar surface and Mars exploration. Let's see. CLPS. Anybody heard of CLPS? Commercial Lunar Payload Services. This is a program that Science Mission Directorate runs for us. There's going to be a launch tonight, as a matter of fact, about 1 a.m. out of Florida. Intuitive Machines is going to launch a small lunar rover that's going to deliver a host of payloads. We've got a couple, and I'll share those with you. In fact, the one on the right, Navigation Doppler LiDAR, is a payload that NASA Langley developed as a velocimeter and a laser altimeter. So if you wake up tomorrow morning, you may read about this one in the press. Hopefully it's a success. I think it launches tonight, scheduled to launch tonight about 1 a.m. and a week from Thursday arrives at the surface of the moon. Okay, a couple other demos. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Have I got 1 o'clock? Good. Let's see. We've got 4 or 5 other CLPS missions that are coming up. The next Intuitive Machines launch in December is basically a whole host of technologies that STMD is flying. Includes a lunar surface drill, a small rover that's going to demonstrate 4G telecommunications, same kind of communication network that we're using on our cell phones. That's a partnership with Nokia. Deployable lunar hopper, a little rover that's going to hop down into lunar craters, little robotic hopper. So that's going to be really exciting. We've got a couple of missions coming up. Firefly is another one of the CLPS providers. Stereo cameras, they're going to look at plume surface interaction and an electrodynamic dust shield. And then finally, about a year from now, we've got 3 little autonomous rovers. They're going to basically do cooperative autonomy and rove around on the surface of the moon. Okay, so that's kind of the quick nutshell STMD overview. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the Moon-to-Mars blueprint objectives. Anybody heard about the blueprint objectives? Well, then I've come to the right place. So this is the other thing I've been doing at headquarters in about the last 2 years. And I want to spend a little time talking about this because this is really important to the kind of the strategy that NASA is pursuing for Moon-to-Mars exploration. So there's a QR code there. You get your cameras out and take a picture of that. It'll come back up on a couple of the slides. But if you want to actually access the document, it's an easy read. It's about 60 pages. It basically lays out the strategy for lunar and Mars exploration that the current NASA administration is pursuing. So let me tell you a little bit about this thing called the Federated Board. Pam Melroy, who's the deputy administrator, came to NASA 3.5 years ago. And there was this entity called the Federated Board, which is a cross-mission directorate group of people. I happen to be the representative on the from STMD with other reps from the other mission directorates. And the whole idea is they're trying to integrate across NASA. NASA has I'll say, a history of being a stovepiped organization within the mission directorates and maybe within the centers. But Pam saw the Federated Board as an opportunity to try and integrate and get the whole agency working together on big problems. So she gave the Federated Board, which has representatives at the deputy associate administrator level from each of the 5 mission directorates, so science, aeronautics, exploration, systems development, space operations, and aeronautics. She gave us an action. She said, I want you to develop a blueprint for sustained human presence and exploration throughout the solar system. That's a pretty audacious goal, quite the challenge. And I want you to do it as an integrated whole of NASA approach, not just 1 or 2 mission directors. I want you to collectively work together and figure out how to solve this problem for the long term. She wanted us to do this with science, infrastructure, transportation, habitation, and operations strategy for all of those laid out. in pretty clear objectives format. And she gave us about a year to do it. So that was the challenge. So the first thing we did was, well, if we're going to go explore the moon and Mars, we probably ought to be able to communicate why we're doing it. So understanding the why is important. And depending on who you are and what your perspective or your background is, there are a couple different or many different reasons why we might want to go explore. The science, the science community obviously has their science rationale. Investigations in deep space, understanding the origins of the universe, how to perform the human body, how does the human body react to deep space environment, all good science rationale and goals from a scientist. Those may not necessarily resonate with everybody. There's clearly national posture, understanding our place in the world and who we want to work with and leading exploration initiatives like this. You can imagine, probably well know, Apollo was driven largely by national posture. Or inspiration. Inspiration is, I think that's the thing that resonates with the American public when you talk about inspiring young minds and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math careers. Inspiration resonates with a lot of people. So we said if you accept those as the whys, why we want to go explore the moon or Mars, you can really think of that as the foundation on which we're going to build this Moon to Mars objective plan. And essentially what we'll call the value proposition for doing it. So we created this document, the Moon to Mars Objective Blueprint. There's a QR code again. We've got the why. The next thing was to define the what it is we're trying to do with an objectives-based approach. And I'll tell you why that's important in a minute. Essentially defining the requirements, and then we can define the how, the actual architecture and the pieces that make up the Moon to Mars plan. So let me talk a little bit about the historical context. And at least I'll just tell you from my perspective, the roller coaster throughout my career, and some of you probably witnessed it as well. If you go back in time, I started my career in the mid-'80s in the vehicle analysis branch. George Herbert Walker Bush was president, and they had just rolled out the Space Exploration Initiative. And I thought that was pretty exciting. And Dell said, hey, come work in the VAB. We're going to go do great things at Mars. That lasted, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and then kind of just fell apart. Change of administration, different ideas, different goals. I can tell you that cycle has been up and down 35 years. Couple of administrations wanted to go to the moon. Few administrations says, no, we're going to go to Mars. We're going to bypass the moon. There was one that wanted to go to an asteroid. All these, good ideas, good plans. But none of them really survived an administration change. And we sort of are where we are. And Pam Melroy and Bill Nelson said, no, we need a plan that will endure multiple administrations. So let's back up and create a real objectives-based approach. What had happened in the past, I think, was more what we would call a capabilities approach. Let's take the money we have and develop a capability, and then we'll figure out what to do with it. Let's go develop a big rocket. It could go to the moon, or it could go to Mars, or it could go to an asteroid. But we're going to develop that thing because that's that's the money we have now. That works okay for a while, but there's no framework built around that. So when the next administration comes in and decides they want to do something different, the framework kind of evaporates, and then people lose big picture. What did we develop that rocket for? What's the thing we're going to go do with that? So there are a whole lot of things that happen that kind of behind the scenes. People start to have what we'll call decentralized efforts, and we just lose clarity on the plan. That has happened multiple times. So what Pam asked us to do was define a set of objectives, long-term objectives, goals and objectives that we can clearly communicate and everybody can get behind with a unity of purpose and hopefully sustain this Moon to Mars endeavor over the long haul. Okay, some of the hindrances that we've seen over the last several decades, why these plans don't seem to work in the long term. Changing motivations, broad goals, too broad goals, external pressures. You know, hey, I've got a rocket that you need to use to go solve your problem. Insufficient funding, things like stovepipes, or restricted communications, not having everybody understand what it is you're trying to do, distributed motivations, all things that can shoot holes in the plan, and all things that I and probably some of you witnessed throughout your career. So again, based on direction from Pam, she said, I want you to develop a goals and objectives-based approach. She brought this gentleman over from DARPA, Kurt Vogel. Spuds is his call sign. His Air Force likes to be called Spuds, as the director of space architectures. Spuds is a terrific guy. She made him the chair of the Federated Board, and we put together this set of objectives for the Moon-to-Mars plan. Spuds was a big, let's see, he's DoD background, came from DARPA, but did time in some other three-letter government agencies, Air Force before that. He is a proponent of something he calls architecting from the right. So let's set out the objectives and the goals and then work backwards from that. Decompose those objectives, define requirements, and then decide what system it is you're going to build. Well, that's just basic systems engineering. I mean, you call it architecting from the right, but it is basic good systems engineering principles. Constancy of purpose. This is something we're trying to make sure everybody understands, has input to, so that it will endure for the long term over multiple administrations. Unity of purpose. We're trying to get everybody on board and, hey, we agree with this plan. It might not be perfect for everybody, but everybody needs to buy into it. And enhanced communication and engagement. We've got a communication strategy. Part of me being here is to help communicate this, but there is a whole agency comm plan that's being rolled out around this. We spent about the last 2 years doing this. Took us a year to just get it out on paper. We've had a number of, well, many actually, outreach activities. We made 2 trips over to the UK, to London, engaged with about 20 international space agencies. We're going to have another similar meeting next week in DC with those same space agencies. Did the same thing with US commercial industry. We had a number of workshops with them, and we reached out throughout the NASA workforce and had a lot of, I'll say, virtual campaigns seeking their inputs. All in all, we got about 5,000 inputs and feedback on the original set of objectives and the plan. Collated all that, filtered it down, and we've come up with the Moon-to-Mars objective set, which essentially consists of 63 top-level objectives: science, infrastructure, transportation, and operations, some recurring tenets, and a pretty broad description and glossary that goes with it. So you can read about them in that document. There's QR code again. And I'm not going to read all of them to you, but I'm going to share a few of them with you, in particular the infrastructure objectives, because STMD led the development of the infrastructure objectives. And in fact, we're not necessarily responsible for all of them, but a large part of our investment strategy revolves around these infrastructure objectives. And I won't read them to you. I'll tell you that the lunar infrastructure goal, kind of the top level overarching goal, is to create an interoperable global utilization infrastructure where U.S. industry, international partners can maintain continuous robotic and human presence on the lunar surface without NASA as the sole customer. So NASA can't afford to foot the bill forever and ever. So we are engaging commercial partners and industry partners to help us build this lunar infrastructure capability. There are 9 lunar infrastructure objectives, and the first 3 are basically power, communications, and position, navigation, and timing. The PN&T one, that is the third objective. You can think of those as the basic utilities. So you've got to have those three things, or that combination of things, to basically be able to explore, survive on the moon, whether it's in cislunar space or on the lunar surface. The next 3, 4, 5, and 6 are really capabilities that we need to sustain a human presence. So advanced manufacturing, precision landing, being able to land in targeted places. To set up a lunar base, you need to get down to the same place where all your assets are. And global and regional surface mobility, so essentially rovers and mobility platforms. And then 7, 8, and 9 are sort of the scalable, the infrastructure we need to scale to larger, I'll just say, global utilization, to be able to go to multiple sites, to stay and endure in multiple places over the long haul. There are also a set of Mars objectives. The 4 Mars infrastructure objectives mirror the first 4 lunar objectives, and the reason there aren't 9 Mars objectives is we were scoped. Pam said, "Hey, I want the objectives to cover both lunar and Mars, but the first Mars missions are going to be the initial campaign. We're not going to Mars with the idea of colonizing Mars and being there for the long haul." So she said, just develop infrastructure, develop Mars objectives that would cover an initial human campaign. So four Mars objectives: power, communications, PN&T, and then in situ resource utilization, being able to create oxygen out of the CO2 atmosphere, for example. Okay, so that said, we've got 11 lunar objectives, and I'll just tell you briefly, STMD has been investing in technologies to address 8 out of the 9. The first one is power. So Langley is actually investing and leading something called the Vertical Solar Array Tower project. So developing a set of a 10-meter deployable vertical solar array that can be pre-positioned, retracted, and positioned in other places. The reason you do it vertically is human return to the moon. The human return to the moon is targeting the South Pole region for a variety of scientific reasons. And the solar arrays, if you elevate them off the surface at very low incident angles, give you, say, near continuous power, almost 24/7 over long periods of time. So really important technology. We're also investing in fission surface power, nuclear power on the surface of the moon. LI2 is the communication piece. We've got some, I talked about the optical communication, DSOC. We've also got a low Earth orbit laser communication demonstration that will be applicable at the moon in cislunar space. Position, navigation, and timing. We've got a number of investments there. Deep space atomic clocks, high precision clocks for navigation. Advanced manufacturing. There's actually a lot of that work going on here at Langley, looking at advanced manufacturing, building things out of lunar resources, extracting metals from lunar regolith and using them in essentially 3D printers. Precision landing, that's another big Langley focus area. We're developing the navigation Doppler LiDAR, I talked about that. Other precision landing sensor systems. So again, you can target very precise small footprint landing surfaces for lunar bases. Mobility, I talked about the 3 Cadre rovers. ISRU is probably an enabling capability in space, in situ resource utilization, an enabling capability for exploration anywhere far from the Earth. But in particular at the moon, there are 2 ISRU technologies and capability sets that we're pursuing, I'd say, with vigor. One of them is going to where water ice deposits have been located through lunar reconnaissance and extracting water from essentially ice, subsurface ice. The other is extracting oxygen and metals from lunar regolith. There's significant oxygen stored in lunar regolith, And using a molten electronic electrolysis process, we think we can extract oxygen and metallic elements from lunar regolith for human use. So just some examples of how we're investing in using those objectives as guideposts to put together our technology investment portfolio, not only in STMD, but across the whole agency. I should have said the science objectives were led by the Science Mission Directorate, as you might imagine, and they are focusing their investment strategy on closing those objectives. Exploration Systems Mission Development Mission Directorate. That's the organization charged with, the big rockets and the mobility platforms. They've led the transportation and habitation objectives. So you look at those objectives, it's pretty clear to see what their investment strategy is over the next decade or so. And then finally, space operations led the operations objectives, as you might imagine. So this really, the Moon-to-Mars objectives document, the blueprint document really is the guidepost for NASA's investment strategy for the future. Okay, just a couple more quick comments. The Moon-to-Mars exploration strategy. I mentioned a lot of the things we're investing in, we're using at the moon to enable human return to the moon. But we're also taking those same technologies and ensuring they have a transition path to Mars, because the ultimate goal is to send humans to Mars. And you can see a few of them. I talked about the Gateway, or mentioned the Gateway. That's the outpost platform that'll be orbiting the moon in cislunar space. We'll use it much like we use the space station for long duration human habitation, and develop essentially the Mars transit habitat capabilities. Crew size, also that'll be research. The crew research on the Gateway will inform our investments and the strategy for the Mars habitat. You can look down the list: Mars rovers, fission surface power. Talked about ISRU. All these things we want to use and demonstrate at the moon is essentially proving ground for Mars technologies. So I'm going to stop there, but before I do, I'll just say this is a different QR code if you really want to dig deep and understand that the architecture that's starting to evolve from the objective set. There's a whole series of, I think we're up to 13 white papers now on some of the decisions and investments that are being made. There's a whole library of things you can go and essentially made available to the public now to see how this is all playing out. So with that, I'm going to stop and offer to take questions. How are we doing on time? Okay.
Very good. Very good.
Q&A. Any questions? Yes. Couple in the room, and can we do questions online? Somebody's going to have to read them to me online if there are questions online. In the back.
You only had 4 objectives on the Mars side, and none of them include a Martian economy, but you said that a lot for the lunar economy. Is the idea that would transfer from the, it's ready to go from lunar economy also Martian economy?
Yeah, so let me try and summarize the question for those online. So we have 4 objectives for Mars, and we didn't really mention the fact that we're might be pursuing a long-term Mars economy. I don't think we're quite there mentally yet. We do want to make sure that there's a sustainable lunar economy, and like I said, not having NASA as the sole customer. Mars is a little further out, and I think we were instructed to develop the objectives to feed the initial Mars campaign to essentially drive the technology set and make sure there's a transition from lunar technologies to Mars, but we're just not ready to commit to a long-term sustained Mars presence yet.
I do have one question online too.
Hey, hang on, Olaf. I think there's a follow-up to this question. Let me try to get this.
So
and then-
like, policy to not encourage that, or is STMD open to that? If there are companies or whoever that are interested in doing that, because I know there's a mission in 2 years to try to send a commercial payload to Mars. JPL has looked at it as well. So is STMD open to that?
So the question is STMD open to long-term Mars exploration?
The same language used for the lunar economy, because for instance, we already did ISRU on Mars. We haven't yet done it on the moon, so there could be opportunities to do those in parallel.
Yeah, so I think STMD is open to that, but we've got to be realistic about our budget. So I'd say we're focused on the lunar piece, developing a sustainable lunar economy with an eye towards Mars in the long term. Okay.
Thank you.
Olaf, you said there's a question online, then we'll come back to the room. How's that?
Yes, from John Corti. Can
Oh, hey,
you
John.
raise your,
Another VAB alum.
So Walt, when you talk about a sustainable lunar presence, is there a piece here as far as like, are all the treaties in place internationally? Is there the whole idea of social sciences of like we develop a society, actually a continual presence on Mars? How that all work? Is that even in being thought of?
Well, let's see. Yes, in a broad sense, there's something called the Artemis Accords. Anybody familiar with the Artemis Accords? A couple, which is really focused on the lunar exploration, but it's the Artemis Accords are essentially a set of accords that have been put together by NASA and by the U.S., actually owned by the State Department, to encourage other like-minded countries to come work with the United States, and in particular NASA, and are essentially a set of, I'll say, operating principles, how we would operate and explore the surface of the moon in a non-threatening, non-militaristic, cooperative sense, probably the easiest way to say that. I could also say there are countries out there who might not ascribe to the Artemis Accords and have their own thoughts about what they'd like to do. And we're trying to be as open and inclusive and to get countries to come work with us in a long-term cooperative sense. So I don't know, John, if that helps. We don't have something like that for Mars, if you were specifically talking about Mars, but I think this is the initial first step to get the global international community to come work with NASA and the United States.
Yeah, and I think that's all good, Walt. You know, it's one thing to put your feet in a place and leave, and then it's another thing to live there. So it all makes a big difference. So appreciate your comments.
Yeah, thanks, John. How about over here? Got a microphone?
Okay. For getting to Mars, I don't know if you've gotten around to putting a price tag on that, but I know that tends to be way out there, and I wonder if the strategy might involve, international cooperation to make that affordable.
Yeah, there have been lots of attempts to put a price tag on a human Mars mission, and you're right, it's not inexpensive. I think the idea is to try and get the international community working with us collaboratively on lunar exploration and developing technologies and capabilities at the moon first, that, just like we said, could then be transitioned to Mars. It's a little longer road, so to speak, a little more expensive, probably a little longer term, but if we can build that international and commercial community around the moon, there might be opportunities to do human Mars exploration downstream. Doug.
Do you care to comment, or would you care to comment, about the impact of commercial launch vehicle companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, which seem to have it. There seems to have been information about conflicting or multiple awards of contracts from NASA to them to develop the landers for the moon or Mars.
Yeah, so the question is, do you want to comment on companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin who are developing human landing system rockets to basically land on the surface of the moon? First of all, big fan of commercial capabilities. They've got a lot of capability and are developing a lot faster than maybe NASA has historically been able to. SpaceX in particular, they have an interesting development strategy. They just launch things and break them and figure out what went wrong and then go fix them and fly them again. And they can do that over and over and over. They've done it over and over and over. Been moderately successful so far, I'd say. They're doing that now for the human landing system. Entirely new rocket development. It's got a lot of risk associated with it. So I think NASA said, hey, we're not going to put all our eggs in one basket. We're going to award multiple contracts. So a second contract was awarded to Blue Origin to develop, say, another human landing system concept capability. That strategy almost exactly parallels the same strategy we used for commercial LEO rockets, right? We now have, well, I don't say we now, we are on the verge of having two companies, SpaceX and Boeing, capable of delivering astronauts to low Earth orbit, space station in particular. There are a couple companies now who can do commercial payloads. So I think that model, that commercial model, is proven to be effective. Hopefully it will be effective for human lunar landing capabilities.
Thank you.
Does that help? Yeah,
Yep.
Okay. Other questions?
In your blueprint, which was quite impressive, thank you. But I had a question about the Earth to Mars mission for humans. Okay, is it still envisioned for the astronauts to like drift for 6 months from Earth to Mars? Is that still seen as a feasible?
No, I don't think that was ever the plan. So that there is the Gateway, which is this lunar orbiting outpost. That will actually be launched without astronauts in pieces and then assembled at NRHO. But it will actually take some time, 6 months maybe, to spiral out from Earth to get to that NRHO orbit. But that's uncrewed. Nobody's along for that ride for 6 months. And then the astronauts will actually be launched to the Gateway, rendezvous with Gateway. The HLS rocket, SpaceX or Blue or whomever is delivering that capability, will pick them up after a day or two, very short duration, from the Gateway and deliver them to the surface. And then the same back from the surface to the Gateway and back to Earth. But I don't think there's ever been a plan to do that over a 6 month spiral out from the
Well,
Earth.
no, I'm confused. I'm talking about going to Mars.
Oh, going to Mars.
And the plan had been to drift for 6 months from Earth to Mars.
Yeah, getting to Mars is hard, and it takes a much longer time to get there than it does to Earth. I'm sorry, from the Earth to the Moon. I don't think drift is probably not the right terminology. They spiral out. There's a low energy Hohmann transfer is the most efficient way to get to Mars. And depending on the propulsion system you use, you can make it maybe a little shorter than a 6 month trajectory, which is what we've flown typically with the small robotic landers. The nuclear thermal propulsion project we're doing with DARPA is an attempt to develop a faster transit capability, but it would still be on order of months to get to Mars rather than days to get to the moon. Okay. Harry.
You mentioned getting private industry to build and presumably also to pay for some of the lunar infrastructure. What's the business incentive for them to do that, and how's that working so far?
That's a great question, and we are trying to crack that nut. There's actually a study that DARPA is leading, and we're working very closely with them and to try and figure out that lunar economy question. So if a company A were to, example, launch a power system, whether it's solar power or fission power, a power plant to the surface of Mars, is there a commercially viable case to be made that some other company who could take that and use that power to essentially mine resources on the surface of Mars that could then be sold to, I don't know, an entity who might want to use those resources to live on the surface, I said Mars, live on the surface of the moon. And it's kind of a multi-tiered spiral economy model, but there are actually economists who are looking at that to see if there is an economically viable, long-term sustainable strategy. I'd like to think that there is, because I don't think NASA by itself can do that and pay for that for long-term sustainable human presence. Okay.
So we'd like to say thank you. Very informative. Let's get giving us the QR code so that we can also look at that document. But we also like to give you a little present from the NASA Langley Alumni Association, a mug for you to use, and always think about us. And you are always welcome here. Pre-retirement and post-retirement.
I look forward to being on that side.
That side of the podium, but definitely if you get updates on this, we'd love to have you back and see where we're going. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. And the talk will be online on our website too.
Yes, done for you. Thank you. And then Olaf, you want to take it over?
Yeah, I just wanted, I don't know if you heard me, but we've had the tradition for about 3 years of having the talks on our website. So Dave Young's talk is already there and from last month, and we'll soon have Walt's talk. It was a very good talk with a wealth of information. Nobody could remember everything, so it's good to have that so we can refer to it and share with others. And we'll take 5 minutes and then we'll have our board meeting after. So thank you very much, Walt. We appreciate it.